I'll just sort of carry on from where my friend Sergeant Gravel left off. His talk was very concise, and it covered very important perspectives on the issue of violent extremism as seen from the law enforcement side. And he ended it with sharing the responsibility of keeping Canada safe with all of the Canadian citizens. And I think that's where this program and this campaign really comes in. It's about community groups connecting with others, working in partnership with others, and trying to educate the masses and increase awareness on critical current issues. Today, the name of Islam has been so closely related to or attributed to violence and extremism that it puts the Muslim world in a state of complete bewilderment. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world today. And these Muslims are living at peace and in harmony with their surroundings for the most part. With events taking place in the Middle East and other parts of the world that are increasingly being made to look like these are Islamic events, or these are events that have to do with some sort of Islamic objective. A lot of questions are raised. A lot of questions are raised by Muslims and non-Muslims. And some of those questions are such that they challenge the very purpose of Islam and the very nature of Islam. You have many people out there thinking or assuming that Islam is violent by nature. It is inherently violent. Or in order to be a practicing Muslim, you have to espouse a certain type of hatred and intolerance. So, I think when questions like that are raised, it becomes important for us to go to Islamic texts and go to Islamic tradition, which has been around for the last 14 centuries, and educate ourselves on the issues. And today, millions of people are trying to gain more knowledge on these issues. However, just like any other subject, it depends on how you approach the subject, what source you go to for your knowledge, and whether you're doing all of this independently or are you doing it under someone's supervision. When we come to an academic institution, such as this one, and we want to obtain higher levels of education, there is a structured way of attaining that education under the supervision of experts of that field. And when a student applies themselves in a certain way, and over a certain period of time, in a certain environment, and with certain parameters, they could end up becoming an expert on that field themselves. But let's just say there were no institutions, and there was no standardization of education, and there were no checks and balances on how we understand a subject, to what extent we understand a subject, and how and if we are in a position to apply the knowledge of that subject. If there were no such checks and balances, I think the world would be in complete chaos. Islam is an immense subject. It is an ocean. And if someone thinks that by watching a couple of documentaries or reading a couple of books or listening to a couple of lectures, they will understand all of Islam, it's just like trying to say that you can understand all of science by spending a couple of months watching YouTube videos or documentaries on a certain channel. The notion is absolutely ridiculous. So what we try to do in these sessions is focus on the issue at hand. And it's not to generalize, knowledge about Islam and education on Islam, but it's to focus on the issues. So the first thing that comes to mind is that Islam does not see itself in isolation from the other world religions. What that means is that as far as the Abrahamic faiths are concerned, Islam sees itself as a continuation of those teachings. Not a recreation, not an independent religion disconnected from everything that happened before it. When you start reading the Quran from the beginning, it opens up with conditions for understanding the Quran. And one of those conditions mentioned right in the beginning is that one must believe in A, what has been revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and B, one must believe in that which was revealed before him, to the prophets before him, in the scriptures before him. And that includes the Torah and the Bible. It includes the scriptures received by Abraham. It includes the message conveyed by all these prophets from the time of Adam right down to Jesus, without exception. And it involves an affirmation of those scriptures, those prophets, the message, and those teachings. This is where Islam comes in. Islam sees all of these prophets as a brotherhood, as a family. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, refers to Abraham as his father. In fact, the Quran, speaking to the Muslims, refers to Abraham as our father. It says that millata abikum Ibrahim. This is the religion of your father Ibrahim. Huwa sammakumul muslimin. It is he that has named you Muslims. So Islam is a very, very ancient religion. It draws directly from the Torah, directly from the Bible, and directly from the teachings of all of these prophets. So we see ourselves as very, very closely interconnected with these other massive and major world religions. We do believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last of the prophets, but we don't believe he's the only prophet. In fact, a person cannot be a Muslim if they don't concurrently believe in Jesus as well, and in Moses and all the others. You can't be a Muslim if you believe, no, I believe that there's just one prophet, his name is Muhammad, and that's it, and I don't believe in it. You can't be a Muslim. You're just not. Now, the teachings of Islam, by and large, are a representation of what has always been taught by all of these prophets and religious scriptures. You'll see the same morals and ethics, the same beliefs. You'll see many of the same advices. Whether you want to look at the 10 Commandments or you want to look at some other aspect, the same ideals of modesty, the same ideals of respect, the same ideals of honesty, a lot of that is just the same. The difference is that Islam expands far beyond creed and worship. And it extends far beyond just a simple code of ethics and behaviors. It touches every aspect of human life. It touches the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect, the social aspect, the spiritual aspect, of course, like every religion does. But it also touches the economic issues and concerns of humanity. It touches the needs and the concerns that arise when one nation comes into interaction with another nation. Foreign policy, foreign relations. And of course, it deals with the issue of defense, where the concepts of peace and war are studied at a very critical level. So if somebody wants to implement Islam just sitting there in their house, they want to practice Islam, they can do it. If somebody wants to implement Islam at the level of their family, they can do it. If they want to implement it at the level of a community, it is possible. If you want to implement it at a global level, it is also possible, because Islam has all of those things. It depends on what your goals are. And to learn about Islam, we go to two sources. We go to the Quran itself. And the Quran is a very powerful book. It consists of over 6,000 verses. And the majority of these verses, the overwhelming majority of these verses, deals with just three subjects. If we were to crudely classify the subject matter of the Quran. Because the Quran, right away in the beginning, comes out saying this is a guidance for mankind. It is a guidance for the pious. So the first subject matter of the Quran is God, His attributes, His perfection, His glory, His grace, His bounties, His favors, how He designs things, how He makes things, the things He's given to mankind. It talks about everything from the sky, things as massive as the skies and their construction, the earth and its construction, the mountains and their construction, the solar system and beyond, the existence and the nature of this universe, right down to something as small as the bee and how beautiful it is and how intricate it is and how beneficial its product, honey, is. If you want to study the Quran from a scientific perspective, you'll see it throwing all kinds of beautiful facts and figures, things like atmospheric pressure and all kinds of wonderful things you'll find there. But all of this is in the context of, look at what God has given you. Look what He's done for you. The second concept, major subject in the Quran, is prophethood. And that covers the lives of many, many prophets. The most frequently, interestingly, the most frequently mentioned prophet in the Quran is not the Prophet Muhammad, it's the Prophet Moses. His name is mentioned more frequently than any other prophet. And his nation is mentioned more frequently than any other nation. So the stories of Moses abound in the Quran. And just like the stories of Noah and Joseph, there's a whole chapter in the Quran, just Joseph. It's called the chapter of Joseph. And it gives the whole story of Joseph and his brothers and the whole thing, all the way till the end. It talks about Solomon and David. And it goes on. It's all about prophets. And of course, it deals with the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him as well. There are many verses that are just consoling him because of the opposition that he is facing once he starts conveying his message. And the third major subject matter is the afterlife. And the afterlife is presented in a context of accountability. That look, you're not just here, it's not just a free-for-all, you're not just here to do whatever you want, but you are ultimately accountable for everything that you do, that you say, and even things that you plan. So that's how the afterlife is presented. It's not presented as something like a fantasy world that, okay, you're all just going to die and go to heaven and that's it, it's just a free ticket. No, you have to work. You have to maintain a sense of piety, a code of piety, a code of ethics, a code of good deeds. You have to stay within certain boundaries and parameters, and you'll get all of that. And if you don't, you won't get all of that. Aside from this, now we were talking about probably over 6,000 verses of the Quran are revolving just around these three subject matters. Then we have about 500 verses in the Quran that are dealing with commandments, injunctions, instructions, do's and do nots, the lawful and unlawful, how to do things. And this covers, like I said, every aspect of human life. It covers creed, worship, it covers our prayers, our fasting, the pilgrimage, charity. It talks about business dealings, ethics of business. It talks about marriage and divorce. It talks about custody of children. And a lot of things are covered in this range of 500 verses. The next source that we go to for our knowledge is the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the amazing thing about these teachings is that they have been so finely preserved, so meticulously preserved, that it's like you have another body of information just like the Quran. Except it's many, many, many times bigger and vaster in size. If the Quran, for example, has, let's just say, 6,600 verses, these prophetic teachings are in the hundreds of thousands. And the Muslims view these teachings as the interpretation of the Quran, the commentary of the Quran. The Quran is very ambiguous, very brief and concise for many things, even that we do every day. For example, the exact method of prayer is not in the Quran. The exact, precise method of prayer comes from the prophetic teachings. And just like that, the exact and precise method of doing many things, we get it from the prophetic teachings. So to approach the Quran without going through this massive text or massive body of text, which we call it the Sunnah, we call it Hadith. If you try to approach the Quran without this, you're never going to understand the Quran. It's just not possible. So these are two major sources that we as Muslims refer to for all our religious information. And that's what we base our lives on. What we have today is we have people, Muslims as well as non-Muslims, quoting certain verses of the Quran and using them. Muslims who are using them are stating that these verses are inciting us or commanding us to carry out acts of violence as a religious obligation. Non-Muslims are quoting them to say that, look, the Quran is so violent. And so that's one thing that these two opponents, those that are invoking radicalization and violent extremism, and those that are against it to the point where they're Islamophobic, both are quoting the same verses. But the fact is that if you do not look at those verses, first of all, in its entire passage, if you take sound bites out of that passage and use a verse that talks about killing, that talks about warfare, you could make it look like it's saying whatever you want it to look like. You can do that with any text. You can do it with a textbook from school. But what people are not doing is they're not reading the whole passage. What event does this refer to? What application does this have? And many times the Quran itself talks about the applications of the verse. And people ignore it and they say, no, it means you have to kill. You have to kill non-believers. You have to inflict harm. You have to do this. You have to do that. So we look to the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as an absolute source of guidance, knowledge, and that is the pattern. The Quran says that in this Prophet's life, you will find the best pattern, the best example. So follow that example. So what do we see in his life? You can categorize or classify his life into two main eras. There is the first era of his life, the first portion of his life, which is 13 years, after declaring prophethood. He declared prophethood at the age of 40. He lived till the age of 63. 23 years he spent as a prophet. From those 23 years, 13 were in his hometown of Mecca, and 10 were in another town called Medina. These are the two places where he spent his life. For the 13 years in Mecca, he came out with a message. And that message was simply that there's one God. There is no God but God. There is no God but Allah. And this message itself was so disturbing to the people of that region because they were very seriously polytheistic. They had beliefs in many, many idols. And it was just not logical, and it was just not possible for them to understand that. How could one God be doing the job of all of these gods that we have? It's not possible. And that sacred place in Mecca that people had been performing pilgrimage of since the time of Abraham, they had surrounded it with idols. There were more than 300 idols around that place. So when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that there's no God except for one God, he was met with staunch opposition. People ridiculed him, people opposed him. His message started spreading. And in the beginning he did it very discreetly, but those people who were touched by the message went and invited other people. And then those went and invited other people. And like this, Islam continued to spread. And as Islam spread, so did the persecution of the people who were taking this message. They were arrested, captured, tormented, persecuted, beaten, whipped, dragged on hot sand, dragged over charcoal. Their bodies were stretched in between animals and torn to pieces. They were insulted, ridiculed, their rights were taken away. All of this is happening, and the question is, how did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, instruct them to react? And how did he respond himself? It was 13 years, if we look at it, all of the violent extremism was taking place on behalf of the Meccans, who were carrying out these terrible attacks on these Muslims, and the Muslims were the victims. Yet Islam continued to spread. It was something that went from heart to heart. It wasn't from tongue to ear. It was a message that was spreading from one heart to the next heart to the next. It just started making sense to people. And they realized that if this is the truth, then it's worth dying for as well. And if we are punished and tortured for it, that's a test from God. We're going to pass that test. We're going to show our perseverance. And a time came within those 13 years where the Muslims, along with their Prophet, were boycotted. And the boycott meant that all of these Muslims were taken out from Mecca and put into one valley, where they were basically locked in for a period of 3 years in the valley of Abu Talib. And for these 3 years, no one was allowed to sell them anything or buy anything from them or have any sort of interaction with them. So they were basically put in this concentration camp for Muslims. They endured that as well. Now, where is the violence in all of this, and where is it coming from? The violence is coming from those that are opposing the Muslims. The Muslims are not doing anything. It's a very passive approach. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, is just reassuring them and telling them to be patient. And the fact that he is saying it is enough for them. One of his greatest supporters was his uncle Abu Talib, his paternal uncle. And Abu Talib was a non-Muslim. He followed the pagan tradition of the indigenous Arabs. He remained that way. But he stood up like a brick wall to protect the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his followers to the best of his ability. People would come and attack the Prophet Muhammad. They would come and take the innards of camels and dump them on him while he was praying, prostrating, so he wouldn't be able to get up. He put like 70, 80 kilos of weight on a person, on their neck, and laying thorns in his path, insulting him, doing all kinds of things. Abu Talib did his best to stop this, but he never accepted Islam. Nor did anyone force him. In any case, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, after these 13 years migrated. And he migrated under very interesting circumstances. He was approached by a group of people from this city called Yathrib, representatives of the 12 major clans of that city came. And they said, we have internal fighting taking place in our city for the last century. And we have lost so many lives. And these fights are just feuds. They're just family feuds. And what we have in our place is, we have indigenous Arabs and we have a lot of Jews. And the different tribes of the Jews have allied themselves with different tribes of us people. So we have our parties. And that's it. We're constantly at war, along with our Jewish supporters from each side. And we keep taking the lives of the people on the other side. They come back and retaliate, take our lives, and it just goes on. And we've lost so many lives now that we can't deal with this anymore. This is there is no solution. And we think that you're the only person who can bring peace to our city. Can you please come and deal with this issue and help us establish peace and security? They also requested the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to send someone to teach them, to educate them about his faith. And so he sent one young person. One youngster went and started educating these people. Sometime after, the Prophet himself also migrated. In between this time, many Muslims had been told that you need to start migrating now. You can leave Mecca. Which was strange because they were born in Mecca, they were raised in Mecca, and now they were in sizable numbers. And if they wanted, they could have created a very powerful uprising. And now with support from these people in Medina who like them, they could have carried out a coup where they take over Mecca. But they didn't. They migrated, they left. And when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, arrives in this city of Medina, one of the first things he does is gets everyone together and has a constitution drawn up to serve the interests of that place, that city. And every city was effectively its own state, to serve the interests of the state. And laid out in that constitution very clearly were the terms and conditions that everyone must abide by, including the fact that people who live in Medina will be free to follow the religion of their choice, but protection and security will be given to all of them irrespective of what faith they follow. And the wordings in that document is that the security of God belongs to all, and it is for all. And no more was there going to be this infighting and this grouping where you have groups warring against one another. Instead, they were all going to pool their resources together to protect the city. And should anything ever happen to the city, all of the inhabitants of the city will stand forward to protect their land. And no one from the city, none of the groups or the tribes, will be allowed to partner up with those people who want to come and attack this city, who want to come and destroy the city. That will be considered an act of treason against the city itself. So you have this place where there are the indigenous Arabs following their religion. You have this growing number of Muslims, many of whom have just migrated there. Others that are from Medina and they're accepting Islam. You have a large number of Jews and you have Christians. And all of them are living in harmony. And it continues like that until people from Mecca decide to attack Medina. They say, well, they've gotten away from us. Now their religion is spreading. We need to wipe them out. They're carrying out a lot of financial activity, if you will. Getting people to invest, sending caravans over to Syria to raise money, to build an army, to wipe out Medina. The first battle takes place outside Medina. That's 2 years after they've migrated. 1 year after that, the people of Mecca come back. So in the third year, another attack takes place on Medina that the Muslims managed to defend, along with the people that are with them. And a couple of years after that, they come back again, and the Battle of the Trench is fought, where Medina is laid under siege, and the Muslims, the people of the residents of Medina, dug this massive trench to stop the people from coming in and attacking. During this period, there's a lot of betrayal. There's a lot of treason. People have broken that pact. And those people that signed off on this, who said that if Medina is ever under attack, we're going to be there to stand up for our land, our state. And the document also said that if the Muslims get into their own issues with people for religious reasons, nobody is obliged to join them in their fights. But if there's an issue that involves that whole state, then everyone has a role to play. And no one will go and partner up with people who want to destroy Medina. All of those things ended up happening. Now at some point, 6 years after this migration, the Prophet Muhammad, along with 1,400 Muslims, go back to Mecca. And they go back as pilgrims, donning the clothing of pilgrims, which is 2 simple white sheets. They have with them animals to sacrifice. And what they're going for is what we call Umrah, the minor pilgrimage. There's a major pilgrimage that happens every year, only once a year in a specific time frame. And then there is the minor pilgrimage, which is carried out throughout the year. So they went for the minor pilgrimage. They were, of course, missing their homeland. They wanted to go and see the sacred sanctuary, Al-Masjid Al-Haram. But when they reach Mecca, they're stopped. And the people of Mecca stop them and say that we're not allowing you to enter. And they say, well, we're here as pilgrims, and all the Arabs, all the people of Arabia have the right to go and perform pilgrimage. That mosque, the Kaaba, doesn't belong to any group. It's for everyone. It's a place of worship. They said, no, we're not letting you. Now the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has 1,400 people. They are in this sacred state of ihram. And imagine the frustration that they've traveled hundreds of kilometers on foot and riding animals to get here, and now there's no entry. They're told that they have to. So at that time, the Prophet Muhammad said, you know what? I'm going to offer you guys a truce. And if you want, we can work out something whereby there's a ceasefire, a peace treaty, a pact. But if you're not interested, because you've been fighting us now, since we've migrated, you have fought us repeatedly. If you really want to fight, then this time we're really going to bring it on to you guys. So what's it going to be? From my side, my proposal is peace. Are you interested or not? They went back and they said, okay, fine. Let's draw up this peace agreement. And the way the document was drawn up, there's a lot of detail involved in it. I was talking about it yesterday at SFU. How the Prophet Muhammad, who has effectively, he has his own state. He has the power, he has arms, he's got a lot of things. He can go in and storm these people. But he is accepting this peace treaty on their terms. They don't want him to be referred to in that treaty as the messenger of God. They say, if we thought of you as the messenger of God, we would have accepted your religion by now. We will not refer to you in those terms. He said, it's okay, strike it out. They said that if anyone defects from Mecca to Medina to your place, you will send them back. And if someone defects from your place to ours, we will not send them back. He agrees. A ceasefire for 10 years is drawn up. While this is happening, one man is arrested and brought. A man who has just accepted Islam from Mecca. He's trying to escape to Medina. He's been arrested by the Meccans and is brought. And they say to the Prophet that, look, this is the first test of your adherence, your fulfillment of this covenant. And he said, yes, the man has to be returned. Even though he protests and he's angry. But the Prophet said, no, we don't break, even though the term hadn't been drawn up and signed off on. Anyways, one of the terms of the treaty was that people will be free to partner up with whatever side they choose. Those who want to join the Meccans' side of the treaty can do so. And those tribes that wish to join the Medinans' side may do so. But anyone who inflicts, once you join the side, if you inflict harm on any of the parties on the other side, it's like attacking the entire group. In other words, once you have formed allies, anyone who attacks an ally is as if they're attacking the group. With these words, the treaty is completed, and the Muslims are also told, it's stipulated that you will not still be allowed to perform pilgrimage this year. You have to come back next year. You'll be allowed to stay for only 3 days. Make sure you don't bring any weapons with you. So they go back. And many are seeing it as a failure. They're seeing it as a defeat because they didn't get to even carry out their worship. But the chapter that was revealed in the Quran at that time was a chapter called the victory, the conquest, where the Quran states, "Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina." Verily, we have given you open victory. And the Muslims are so confused. What kind of victory is this? We're having to go back. We weren't allowed to enter Mecca. We weren't allowed to carry out the pilgrimage. We're going back, and it's like we've agreed to this one-sided treaty. It doesn't do anything for us, and it's being called a victory. And they came back to the Prophet Muhammad and asked him that, is it really a victory? He said, oh yes, it is a victory, and you will soon see how it is. The Muslims go back, and after 1 year, they return for that period of 3 days, and they make up for that pilgrimage that they weren't able to do the year before. And amazingly, within this period of 1 year, Islam has started spreading so rapidly. In fact, historians say that more people accepted Islam in that 1 year than all of the 6 years before that, and all of the 13 years in Mecca before that. And that's what the Quran was referring to as the victory. Because the Quran, in numerous places, refers to victory as people entering into the fold of Islam. That's your victory. It's not about institutions, it's not about land, it's not about having your governments, it's not about any of that. It's about people seeing what Muslims believe is the truth and accepting it, and that's it. It's not about control. Anyways, sometime after that, one of the allies of the Meccans attacked one of the tribes that was an ally of the Muslims. They attacked them at night and killed them as they were sleeping. News of this was conveyed to Medina, and the Prophet responded to this by giving the people of Mecca 3 options. He said, either you need to remove these people, the party, the tribe that inflicted this damage, that carried out this attack, either you disavow them. In other words, you disconnect them from your side of the path, that they're not our allies anymore. You break off your alliance with them because they have breached this. And you know that what they have done implies, basically it's an act of war. So if you're serious about this treaty, you need to separate them from your side, from your alliance. Second option is that you need to pay the blood money of all of the people that were killed in this attack. So a sum used to be paid normally. It was a normal sort of a procedure that if someone kills someone accidentally, then they would have to pay blood money to make up for the loss of that life. He said, you people need to at least pay the blood money for all of these victims to their relatives. Not to us, to their relatives. Or the third option is you annul this treaty altogether. They said, we are breaking the treaty. We don't want it. It was arrogant of them, and they realized it as well. And they tried to send people after that to correct it, but it was too late. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received this message, he said, okay, fine. If you want to break the treaty, then you should know that I am coming now to Mecca. And he comes with a group of 10,000 people, marches towards Mecca. And in between, people are still accepting Islam. While he is traveling, while he is moving, people are coming and accepting Islam. And one of those people was one of the chiefs of Mecca, named Abu Sufyan. And Abu Sufyan was responsible for some of the greatest campaigns against the Muslims in the previous years. In other words, this was the man who was financing and organizing and leading the armies that had been attacking the Muslims all this time. He went and accepted Islam. And somebody suggested to the Prophet that these Arab chieftains like to be honored. They like to be given special privileges. So give him something. He said, okay, fine. When we enter Mecca, if there are skirmishes and if there are problems, anyone who enters into his house is safe, won't be touched. So he uses this opportunity to appeal to the generosity of the Prophet and says, well, my house is pretty limited. How many people could possibly fit there? So the Prophet responds by saying, okay, whoever enters the Grand Mosque in Mecca is safe. They won't be touched. He says, even the mosque is limited. What if it starts overflowing with people? He said, then you tell them that anyone who goes into his own house and closes the door is safe, he will not be touched. And in this manner, the Muslims went in to Mecca without bloodshed, without killing people, without causing destruction. And the Prophet goes into the Grand Mosque, the Kaaba, and he announces there that there is no reprimand for you people today. There's no reproach. Go, I have forgiven you, may God forgive you. Now, for a Muslim, the life of the Prophet is always the ideal model. Always. And everything I've said so far explains, I think, in fairly clear terms, the kind of life that the Prophet was leading and the kinds of policies that he was following and his people were following. But I want to add something to this. This does not mean that there is no concept of war in Islam, because there is. There has to be. Just like there's a concept of war in every single state that is worth calling this a state. Defense is a genuine need. It's an actual need of humanity. Since time immemorial, people have realized that their people, properties, and interests could be at risk. And since time immemorial, people have prepared certain resources and assets to protect themselves, their civilians, their properties, and their interests. And it is here that the whole concept of defense begins. And countries have always, states, nations, groups have always been prepared to protect themselves and act preemptively if necessary. Sometimes you're under a direct attack. You need to respond. Sometimes your ally is under attack and you need to respond. And sometimes you're expecting to be attacked and you preempt it and attack first. This is as old as the world itself. If Islam is a complete religion, how could it omit something like this? So the word jihad, which is a huge buzzword today, is simply the defense mechanism that Islam has in its teachings. It's that simple. It's just like your Ministry of Defense here in Canada. The fact that you have that ministry, or the fact that you have that army, or whatever assets you have, for your armed forces has nothing to do with whether you're peaceful or warmongering. It's how you use them that will determine that. Having those things, having a manual, having laws and systems and processes through which the defense mechanism is activated is not itself a violent thing. It's a prudent thing. So jihad in Islam is that system of defense. And just like in any country, there are laws and there are processes that must be completed before the defense mechanism can be deployed, Islam has the same thing. Otherwise, you have this massive mechanism that could fall into anyone's hands and anyone could use it for whatever purpose they deem fit. And no country would allow that. No system would allow that. And Islam doesn't allow it either. So in order for something to be a jihad, it means that A, it is being waged for the sake of Islam. And B, it is being decided through a process that has been put in place for such a purpose and agreed upon by all the Muslims of the world. And for a group of people to get together and say we are going to carry out a jihad without following the protocols, the laws, and the processes that have been set for such type of decisions, it's just as ludicrous as us people in this hall getting together and saying we're declaring war on behalf of Canada against such and such country. Makes no sense. There is no validity to it. There's no value to it. It doesn't mean anything. Because Canada, like any other country or state, has laws and it has processes that must be fulfilled before the armed forces or the defense assets of the country can be deployed. It's that simple. And unless that process is completed, that's it. Nothing's going to happen. So if a group of people say we're declaring war on behalf of Canada because we're Canadians, we're devout Canadians, and that country, we just don't like them, and we get our hands on some weapons and we go and actually carry out an attack, we will be looked at as criminals by Canada and by the other country. And both will do their utmost best to apprehend us and stop us, just like they should. What we have happening today is that some people, because of conflicts, and I would like to assume or suggest that the conflicts themselves are very real. The conflicts are not fake. There are some very serious issues going on in the world today. But those conflicts are not necessarily revolving around any religion. Those are conflicts specific to a region, specific to a part of the world, specific to conditions that have been going on for decades, conflicts that have a great deal of political element in them. They're very sophisticated problems. And if they weren't, they would have been solved by now. And there have been people, as always, who were on the receiving end of those conflicts. They lost a great deal. They suffered a great deal. There are people who have been tortured. People whose families have been wiped out. People whose womenfolk have been raped in front of their eyes. Atrocities have been committed. Now there are some people who've taken the whole thing into their own hands and say, you know what? The only solution for us is to build our own force and to rebel against all establishments and all systems and institutions, make our own system, and maybe we will be able to live in peace. Maybe we'll be able to to live life the way we want. And for them, because they do have a strong affinity to Islam and Islamic teachings, they want that world of theirs to be based on Islamic teachings. So the name of Islam is plastered everywhere. And it's made to look like they are Islam themselves. But there are a few problems here. Key problems. The first thing is that the problem was not, or the conflict was not religious in nature to begin with. There was no issue with religion. What was wrong with religion in Syria and Iraq? Nothing. You had huge numbers of Muslims living there, free to practice their religion, free to preach their religion, free to build mosques and do whatever you wanted to do. And it was being done, Islam was being practiced in harmony, in coexistence with Christianity and other faiths. It's been like that for centuries. So how did all of this become a religious conflict? There is no religious conflict. In Syria, you had the present government being opposed by a rebel element. Can anyone honestly say that that's a religious conflict? It's a purely political conflict. You have Sunni Muslims on both sides, and you have Shia Muslims on both sides as well. So religion is not a factor that caused that conflict, nor is there any religious connotation that we can see. Iraq, what's the conflict there? How could there be a religious conflict in Iraq, which is predominantly Muslim? And if, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you wanted to promote Islam, well, you don't need guns to promote Islam. In a country that's already Muslim, preach to them, educate people, have programs, build schools, colleges, universities, spread literature, make websites. Like, how do you spread a religion? It's through education, through awareness, through talking, through encouragement, and the religion will spread if it has substance. So what the Muslim world doesn't understand is that where did Islam get brought up into all of this conflict? Yes, it's true you happen to be Muslim, and that's fine. But you have your own issues. So deal with them. Deal with the issue according to the implications of the issue. Why are you making this into a religious thing? So that's one problem. Second problem. How in the world do you establish an Islamic state by attacking Muslims? We just don't get it. You have killed hundreds and thousands of Muslims in your path to establish, an Islamic state? Really? Wouldn't an Islamic state be sort of based on protecting the interests? If it was an Islamic state, then your first goal would be to protect the lives and properties of Muslims. But that's exactly what you attacked. You killed Muslims, and you took their properties away. You destroyed whatever remnants of a country they had, and took it into your own hands. Doesn't look very Islamic. Thirdly, I mentioned to you that jihad is a defense mechanism. It operates on laws, very clear laws. Just like if you were to sit down with any general of an army, they would lay down for you the ethics of war as defined by their country and as defined by international law. That's how wars have to be waged. No, there's no doubt there's a lot of damage that comes out of wars. But even wars are based on certain ethics. Islam has a very clear code of ethics that must be followed in a war if it is to be a jihad. Such as not engaging with non-combatants. There is no engagement with non-combatants. It doesn't exist. There is no destruction of religious symbols, churches, synagogues. In this case, you got these guys blowing up mosques. It's hilarious. It's like, yes, we're establishing an Islamic state. We're going to blow up this mosque. Very Islamic. There is no disruption of the lives of civilians or in the natural resources of a country and a place. We see them breaching the laws of jihad at every single level. What in the world justifies you taking a human aid worker, taking them as a captive? First of all, how can you make them a captive? You can only take combatants as captives. Somebody who is warring against you, okay, they can be a prisoner of war, but somebody who's not involved in the war, how do they become a prisoner of war? They're not there for either side, they're just there to help people. How do you take a journalist as a captive? Under what? Under what? And then you behead them in front of the world, making you look like, okay, this is also a part of Islam. So there are some serious problems with what is happening in the Middle East today. And these are problems that all Muslims are concerned about. The Muslim scholarship is just about fed up with these people. Everyone has denounced them. But when it reaches the point where they incite the citizens of countries to carry out attacks within those countries, that is something that we will not stand for. You have a problem in the Middle East, you're dealing with it, you have issues, whatever it is. But when you bring your war to our places where we live, and you make it look like Muslims are at some kind of a religious conflict with their surroundings, and you're inciting these foolish youngsters to carry out attacks on, for example, Canadian soil, that is something that we will not stand for. Because we've been here, we grew up here, our children are growing up here. And we have absolutely no intention of allowing a country like Canada to become a playground for these idiots who are just planting terror in the hearts of mankind. And one point I like to make is that Muslims have been always the greatest recipients of the damage inflicted by attacks of terrorism. They always have been. Check the stats. How many Muslims have been killed through suicide bombs? In Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, other parts of the world. The numbers are mind-boggling. How many Muslims have been killed by this group? And how many Muslims continue to be executed? They'll go into villages and just execute hundreds of people, 300 people at one shot. Just like that. But then you add to it the damage that is carried out to the collective image of Islam and Muslims, leaving the whole world absolutely confused about what Islam is about and what Muslims are about, and creating obstacles for Muslims who just want to spend their lives like regular human beings. There are many Muslims who are not so involved in the religion. They're involved at a level of creed and belief, but it's not the greatest feature of their lives. They're just out there doing what everyone else does. Because of their name, because of their affiliation, life becomes difficult for them as well. So a lot of harm has been done to Islam, has been done to Muslims at the grassroots levels, where our children are harassed. Women who cover their head are harassed, made fun of, insulted, threatened. It happens with members of my own family. Just in the supermarket, and all of a sudden somebody will say something really nasty. Somebody will start yelling at you. They'll say, "Go back to your country." Somebody comes up to my wife and says, "Go back to your country." She's like, "Well, I was born here. Where do you want me to go?" This is my country. It's the only country I know. I haven't been anywhere else. Because she wears a hijab. I get calls from new Muslim converts. Canadian woman who converts to Islam. She starts covering her head. She said, the same people that I used to meet, going to work every morning, my neighbors, all of a sudden they're giving me these dirty looks. I'm at the bus stop and people are just staring at me like they want to kill me. What did I do wrong? These are some of the effects of the damage that these people are inflicting. So what we have been trying to do through this campaign is educate Muslims about these issues. And what I'm telling you is a very general, almost a diluted version of the discourse that I have with Muslims because of due to their religious background, their understanding of the text, I can go into each text piece by piece. And I can explain to them, look, this is where these groups have used this text. This is why their application of the text is wrong. And we do that piece by piece till we deconstruct that whole narrative that they have built around themselves. So I don't know what's going to happen in the Middle East in the future. But my own personal resolve is that I will not allow, to the best of my ability, as a citizen, as a simple, humble citizen, I will not allow people to convey a message of violence and incite Canadians to carry out acts of violence on Canadian soil. And I think that that's my duty as a Canadian, and that's my duty as a Muslim as well. Because the Quran carries a very strong message against disrupting the peace, the general peace. The Quran states, وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْفَسَادِ. God does not like disruption, just disrupting things. And God does not like those who cause disruption. In fact, I think that the Quran is the only text that actually gives a punishment, a specific penalty for terrorists. I don't talk about it too much because we usually run out of time. But this is the last lecture in this series that we are doing at academic institutions for this month. But the penalty for those people who cause disruption and destroy the assets of a community is very, very severe. Even though this was abrogated later on, the text still exists in the Quran. And this punishment was given to a group of people, or it was decreed for a group of people who had come and supposedly accepted Islam. They had become sick. And so they had been sent off to this place to live and until they got better. And what they had done after some time is the camels that they were living around, they went and killed all the camels. They killed the shepherds. They stole a lot of wealth. And they took off. And they caused a lot of damage. They left behind in their wake this massive scene of destruction. Killing people's properties, taking people's lives, destroying things along the way. So the Quran came out with a very, very staunch punishment. And such people in punishment for causing such destruction should either be killed or they should be crucified. Or, and it's or, because such punishments are always sensitive to conventions and to the possibility of application, or they should have one hand and one foot cut off. Or they should be banished from the land that they've done this in forever. Why? Because they cause disruption, they cause damage to the masses. They put the peace of that community at stake. Destroyed it. And there is no room for that. So anyone who says or who believes that jihad means going and causing harm to civilians is out of their mind. They're completely ignorant of what the Quran is saying and what Hadith is saying. So, moving forward, what I think needs to be done is for Muslims need to get more familiar with their religion, and Muslim youth need to come more into the congregation, into the mainstream circles, and that's where they will be safe. If you stay out in the periphery and you have no contact with the mainstream congregation, and like Derek was saying so correctly, it's not about living out there in the digital community. It's about actually staying with people, with real people, coming into that environment. Until people do that, we don't know what they're going to be exposed to, honestly. We have no way. All of these people that have been arrested and that have, no one knows them. They had no. C.A.V.E was one guy who used to go to a mosque here in Burnaby. I spoke to the people there. What was he like? They're like, he never spoke to anyone. He was come, pray, and then people didn't know what was going on with him. And then they find him trying to sleep in the mosque, and the alarm goes off. when the caretaker sets the alarm at night, the alarm goes off. It tells you that in such sector of the building there is somebody. So the caretaker goes and finds this guy trying to sleep under the stairwell. He says, "What are you doing here? Get out!" Kicks him out. Sometime later, he finds him again. Sometime later, finally, apparently one night he managed to sleep without being detected by the system. People found him in the morning. They said, "Okay, look, sorry, but you can't come here again." But had that person, people are blaming the system. They're saying that, the social services should have stepped in and helped him, and so on and so forth. But as long as a person is sane, they are, what we say in Islam, the word means legally accountable. They're legally accountable for their own actions. And yes, I do realize that C.A.V.E people did try to reach out in the form of doing petty crimes to get arrested and then tell the judge that, "Look, I have a serious crack addiction. If you put me back out there, I'm going to go back." He did try to reach out. But what he should have done is reached out to the Muslim community. He should have reached out to the scholars, to the imams. That, "Hey, I have a problem here. Can somebody help me out?" But the rest of these guys, no one has heard of these people. The fellow who ran over the two soldiers, no one knows him. Who knows where he converted, where he became Muslim, and how he became Muslim, and what brand of Islam he was exposed to. Next thing you know, the guy's running over soldiers. So for the Muslims, they need to stay within the community, within the mainstream. For non-Muslims, go to the sources to learn about Islam if you want to. If you're only turning to YouTube, I don't know what you're going to watch. Just like a Muslim goes and researches ISIS, I don't know what they're going to end up seeing. They might end up seeing a propaganda video and being interested. So go to the sources, which means go to the Muslims, talk to them, ask questions, further your understanding, because the ultimate goal, our ultimate goal, is that everyone should be able to live with harmonious coexistence with the other people, regardless and irrespective of their faith and their belief, their ethnicity, and all of those things. That is of ultimate importance. And the second thing is that I'm encouraging Muslims, Muslim youth, who see a lot of problems in the world around them. I'll be very honest. People are frustrated. People are frustrated by the double standard that is used by many of the Western countries on issues of peace and war. People are disturbed by certain elements of foreign policy. People are disturbed by what happens in Palestine and what happens in other parts of the world. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these Muslims to channel that frustration of theirs into positive action. And we are trying to encourage them to use legal means to achieve change, instead of trying to take the law into their own hands. Instead of going and doing something radical or something extreme, use legal means. Become an activist. Okay, go and have a peaceful protest. Go and join the government. Become a politician. Become a lawmaker. Become a lawyer. Do something positive. Write about it. Create a blog. There are a lot of things that can be done. But under no circumstances can we step out of the realm of Islamic and international law and start resorting to violent extremism, for solutions, because there exist no solutions in violent extremism. They're just not there. All it's going to do is worsen the situation. If you care about Muslims, if you truly cared about Muslims, you would never ever do something like this. I think it's a very narrow-minded mindset that the youngsters are sort of brought into, and they're given this rhetoric where they feel that no, now we're compelled to do something for their religion, and this is what it is. And I'm not shy to say that I think people living in the West need to critically reassess their approach to Middle Eastern issues. Are we really reaching solutions, or are we just worsening the problem? And is it really okay for us to go in and bomb a country wherever we feel it's necessary, and then when someone else does it, we put other labels on them? So at some point we have to reassess all of this, and at some point we have to reassess whether bombing the smithereens out of people is the ultimate solution. Is that really going to solve problems? It didn't solve anything for us in Afghanistan. It didn't solve anything for the Americans in Iraq. Is it going to solve something for us today? In fact, the more we do that, the more people feel that they're at war with the world. History proves that when a group of people is oppressed or attacked or marginalized for a long period of time, it only strengthens them. Hasn't weakened them yet. And perhaps that's why Al-Qaeda has morphed into ISIS. And it's taken such a dangerous shape that we don't know what to do with it. And if we continue to attack them from the skies, who knows? Even if we end up dispersing them, they're just going to go and regroup somewhere else, and then you're going to have to deal with 10 such groups. So these are all some very important points that come to mind. I hope that the talk, the presentation by Sergeant Gravel and myself has been able to shed some light. We are definitely going to continue our educational endeavors, and it's a real treat for us to have partners like Sergeant Gravel in the RCMP who are working with us so closely, and the work that they're doing is really it's a big asset for the community, and we feel like the work we're doing complements their work. And I think that in the future we're going to need more such partnerships across communities, with many different groups coming together on common fronts, working on common causes, and that's how we will be able to hopefully address the issues that threaten the well-being of all of us today. So with that, I'll conclude my talk. Thank you very much for all your attention.